The year was 1923, and inside the Crosman Brothers Seed Company in Rochester, New York, the air was heavy with corn dust and quiet defeat. The small storefront on Monroe Avenue smelled of burlap, fertilizer, and the damp bite of an upstate winter that refused to loosen its grip. Wooden floorboards groaned beneath the boots of men who worked the land, though fewer boots came through the door with each passing week. Money was scarce, and the open ledger on the counter told a brutal story. Red ink filled the pages, margins were thin, and hope was thinner. The Crosman family, Frank and his relatives, were not industrial giants or visionaries chasing global influence. They were simply merchants trying to sell a promise. A seed represented a future harvest, a silent contract between a farmer and the soil. But in the early 1920s, that contract was collapsing. The problem was not drought or frost. The problem was pests. Farmers walked into the shop furious about rabbits, rats, woodchucks, and crows that stripped fields bare before crops could mature. An unstoppable army of thieves was devouring livelihoods before they even had a chance to grow. The frustration inside the shop was suffocating. Farmers bought seed with resignation, fully aware that much of what they planted would end up feeding rodents instead of their families. The Crosmans realized they were selling ammunition for a battle their customers were losing. They felt a creeping dread that their business had become obsolete. A man could not invest in the future if he could not defend the present. Instead of chasing better marketing or lower prices, they turned to a local inventor named William Lan. Lan was a mechanical tinkerer who worked in a cluttered workshop that smelled of grease and ozone rather than soil. He had no interest in toys or children's gadgets. His obsession was compressed air. He believed the spring, piston BB guns on the market were weak, inaccurate, and noisy. He wanted to build something serious, something functional, something powerful. Lan envisioned a plain pneumatic rifle powered by a pump system, a miniature engine that compressed air into a sealed chamber until it stored enough energy to drive a lead projectile through wood. The Crosmans saw a lifeline. They struck a deal that would change everything. They would not just sell seeds. They would sell protection. The rifle would be agricultural equipment, a tool for farmers, a guardian of crops. The prototype was a formidable machine. It looked nothing like the flimsy metal toys sold in dime stores. It resembled a real firearm, with a heavy rifled steel barrel for stability and a walnut stock that felt solid and warm against the cheek. It fired a .22 caliber lead pellet designed to deliver lethal impact on small game. The defining feature was the pump. The user had to work for every shot, pumping the forearm repeatedly, feeling resistance build with each stroke, physically storing power inside the metal heart of the rifle. 3 pumps could dent a tin can, while 10 pumps could drop a rabbit at 30 yards. When the Crosmans placed the rifle on the seed shop counter, everything changed. Farmers stopped looking at sacks of grain and stared at the steel. They lifted it, felt its weight, pumped the handle, listened to the hiss of air, and pulled the trigger. The sound was not a bang but a sharp pneumatic cough, followed by the brutal thud of lead striking wood. It was quiet, precise, and deadly. The response was immediate. Farmers ignored the seeds and fertilizer and demanded the rifle. Sales exploded. Seeds gathered dust, while rifles disappeared faster than Milan could build them. The Crosmans realized they had misunderstood their own business. They believed they were selling growth and nurture. But the market revealed a deeper desire for protection and power. The seed shop became a chrysalis. In 1924, the Crosman Rifle Company emerged. Seed shelves were replaced with gun racks. Concerns about frost gave way to concerns about ballistics. Crosman's identity was forged in agricultural desperation, not childhood fantasy. Its products were tools before toys, built to be harder, faster, and more lethal than competitors. They did not sell romance or cowboy dreams. They sold control, security, and the satisfaction of a cleared garden. The farmers of Rochester walked in searching for a way to grow crops and walked out armed with high-powered air rifles. Backyards transformed into hunting grounds. The quiet seed shop was replaced by the rhythmic pumping of air chambers, a sound that would echo across the nation and signal the rise of a new kind of shooter who needed no gunpowder, only strength and compressed air. The move from a cramped storefront to a massive industrial complex in Fairport, New York symbolized an empire coming of age. By the mid-20th century, Crosman Arms had built a manufacturing fortress rivaling major armories. The Fairport factory was a cathedral of air pressure. Filled with the scent of cutting fluid, the glow of welding torches, and the pounding rhythm of stamping presses, engineers in white shirts and skinny ties obsessed over compression ratios, valve timing, and barrel metallurgy. To them, spring piston guns were crude toys, and Crosman was something else entirely. A precision instrument born from necessity and forged in desperation. They were focused on something far more refined, the science of pneumatics. The guiding philosophy inside the Fairport factory was variable power. This doctrine defined Crosman and separated it from every other air gun on the market. A spring gun released the same fixed amount of energy with every trigger pull, a rigid and binary system. Crosman engineers believed in giving the shooter control. They believed a young shooter should be able to make choices. 3 pumps were enough for quiet basement target practice, accurate and low stress. In the field, tracking a rabbit through brush, the shooter could pump 6, 7, 8, or 10 times to build real power. This system turned the air rifle into a lesson in physics. Energy was not free. It had to be earned. The compressed air in the chamber was the battery, and the shooter's arm was the generator. The first pump was easy, the second smooth, but by the 8th or 9th pump the resistance became intense. The air pushed back. The lever grew difficult to close, and the shooter felt the stored force building inside the reservoir. It created a tactile connection between human and machine that no spring mechanism could match. In 1966, this philosophy took physical form in a legendary object, the Crosman Model 760 Pumpmaster. If the Red Ryder was the Model T of air guns, affordable and universal, the Crosman 760 was the muscle car. It was sleek, aggressive, and designed to resemble the high-powered hunting rifles locked away in glass cabinets. It featured a bolt action instead of a lever, a deliberate design choice that mimicked military and hunting rifles. Loading it required pulling the bolt back, hearing the mechanical click, engaging a magnetic tip that captured a steel BB, pushing the bolt forward, and locking the round into the chamber. The ritual felt technical and professional, slowing the shooter down and turning every shot into a deliberate act rather than a game. The 760 became an instant sensation and a defining artifact of American suburbia in the 1970s. It marked the transition from childhood to adolescence, from toy to responsibility. a Red Ryder was given to a 7-year-old, while a Crosman 760 was given to a 12-year-old as a symbol of trust and maturity. It was lethal within its small world domain and highly effective for pest control. The 1970s were the golden age of the backyard hunter, when woodlots and creek beds still bordered suburban neighborhoods. A boy with a 760 ruled his territory, not playing but patrolling. The rifled barrel and adjustable sights meant missed shots reflected skill, not equipment. The engineers built the 760 like a tank. The receiver was heavy die-cast metal with a deep black finish. The stock was originally solid and heavy, and even later synthetic materials were dense and durable. A 1970s 760 felt cold, substantial, and solid in the hand. It did not rattle, except for the internal reservoir of BBs that sounded like a maraca of ammunition. The rifle went on to sell more than 16 million units, becoming one of the best-selling rifles in history. It created a distinct youth subculture. The Crosman kid wore camouflage from Army surplus stores, shot from the prone position, controlled breathing, and waited patiently for the perfect shot. The Fairport factory operated around the clock to meet demand. The testing range produced a constant low-frequency rhythm of pneumatic discharges. Engineers were celebrated for bottling the hunting experience and selling it for under $20. Crosman reached its peak, a cathedral of compressed air embedded in American culture. Executives watched truckloads of pumpmasters ship across the continent and believed the demand for quality, weight, and power would never fade. The slogan, "Power without powder," was more than marketing. It was a promise that engineering and mechanical advantage could replace gunpowder. By the end of the 1970s, Crosman sat on the throne of the airgun world, confident in its future. They were unaware that the era of steel and wood was about to be dismantled by corporate cost-cutting. The shift did not arrive with a dramatic collapse, but through briefcases carried by executives who had never hunted a rabbit. The family-owned, engineer-driven armory gave way to corporate ownership and financial optimization. Crosman became an asset on a balance sheet, traded between investment groups such as the Coleman Company and others. A new philosophy replaced engineering excellence, cost efficiency. Boardroom discussions shifted from performance to price reduction. The guiding principle became the minimum acceptable product rather than the best possible design. A new material, Zytel, a glass-filled nylon marketed as a space-age miracle, entered the picture. Marketing language framed it as composite polymer and lightweight, but the reality was simple. Metal required mining, smelting, machining, and finishing. Plastic required melting, molding, and seconds to produce a part. Corporate directives ordered a redesign of the Crosman 760 Pumpmaster. To the veteran engineers, this was not modernization but disassembly. The first major change was the receiver. For decades, it had been a solid block of metal that held everything in rigid alignment and absorbed abuse. The new design replaced this with two plastic clamshell halves, joined along a visible seam. The precision and permanence of machined metal gave way to molded plastic shells, marking the beginning of a fundamental transformation in Crosman's identity and craftsmanship. They used visible Phillips head screws that dotted the side of the rifle like acne. The sleek, seamless lines of the earlier models were shattered by these fasteners, constantly reminding the user that the gun was nothing more than two pieces of plastic pressed together. The most devastating change was the bolt. The original bolt action had been the soul of the 760, a piece of metal that moved with deliberate mechanical purpose. It clicked back, slid forward, and locked down with authority. The corporate redesign replaced this with a plastic nub that scraped instead of clicked. Gritty and hollow. Plastic sliding on plastic with no sense of precision. The tactile feedback that once conveyed seriousness and responsibility was replaced with a sensation that felt temporary and artificial. The degradation continued into the barrel itself. To save costs, manufacturing was altered and rifled steel barrels were replaced with smooth bore steel. Rifling had been expensive, but essential for accuracy. Spinning the projectile for stability. Smooth bore barrels removed that precision, turning pellets into unpredictable projectiles that drifted and wobbled beyond short distances. A rifle that had once been a precision tool became a scattershot device. The lessons of marksmanship were replaced by randomness. The weight disappeared. The original pumpmaster had reassuring heft and required strength to stabilize. The plastic versions felt hollow, echoing when tapped like a household container. This lack of mass made the rifles harder to control, twitchy in the hands, and difficult to keep on target. Even the packaging changed. The golden era illustrated boxes that made opening a rifle feel ceremonial were replaced by blister packs designed for pegboard displays in department stores. The rifle became just another product on a shelf, indistinguishable from cheap tools or batteries. The ritual of ownership was gone, replaced by disposable packaging cut open and thrown away. This transformation was driven by the rise of big box retail. Local hardware stores vanished, replaced by national chains that demanded low prices and high volume. Performance and craftsmanship were secondary to hitting a specific price point. Crosman was forced to strip away quality to meet those demands. Value, engineering the product until its soul was gone. Engineers watched steel parts, replaced with plastic replicas, and heard the pump shift from a solid mechanical sound to a hollow clatter. The tragedy was not only material but philosophical. The Crosman name had once implied durability and inheritance, a rifle that could be passed down through generations and maintained with care. The plastic versions were disposable, impossible to repair when cracked or broken. The culture shifted from maintaining and cherishing to buying, breaking, and discarding. The Crosman kid of the 1990s held a rifle that looked tactical and aggressive, but felt hollow beneath the surface. The power and respect once associated with the brand faded, and treating a weapon like a toy became increasingly common. Corporate profits rose as millions of plastic rifles flooded superstores. But the spirit of the original seed shop disappeared. The connection to land utility and necessity was replaced by suburban novelty. The rifles became seasonal toys rather than lifelong tools. The sound of the plastic action marked an empire cashing in its legacy, one injection, molded part at a time. The collapse of the Crosman empire was not financial. The company expanded, acquired competitors, and grew on paper. But culturally, its influence dissolved. The environment that had shaped the Crosman kid disappeared. Suburbs became denser, wood lots vanished, fences grew higher, and informal hunting grounds were erased by zoning laws and social change. The casual acceptance of a boy carrying an air rifle gave way to suspicion and emergency calls. The gun shifted from a tool of discipline and rural life to a symbol of threat. As backyard hunting became unacceptable, Crosman pivoted to selling fantasy instead of function. Engineers were directed to abandon traditional hunting aesthetics and design rifles that resembled military weapons seen in media and games. Wood grain and craftsmanship vanished, replaced by black plastic and aggressive styling. The brand moved further from its roots, selling imagery and attitude instead of precision and durability, marking the final transformation of an industrial legacy into a mass-produced symbol. The sleek, classic lines of the Model 760 were eclipsed by a new generation of Airguns, modeled after military rifles. These M4 style clones were aggressive in appearance, covered in Picatinny rails, meant for accessories the guns did not truly need. Fake magazines, rattling collapsible stocks, and angular plastic bodies were designed to imitate the silhouette of the AR-15. This marked a profound psychological shift. The original Crosman Pumpmaster had been a practical tool, shaped like a hunting rifle, because it was meant to prepare a user for a real hunting rifle. It represented aspiration grounded in responsibility. The new tactical air guns were theatrical props, encouraging children to imitate soldiers rather than hunters tending a garden. The irony was severe. By making the guns look more militaristic to attract a new generation raised on shooters and action media, Crosman made them more frightening to suburban parents and neighbors. The same design, meant to keep the brand relevant, accelerated its social exile, making backyard use feel dangerous and inappropriate. The deeper loss went beyond aesthetics. The heart of Crosman had always been the pump. Pumping the rifle was a ritual, a physical investment that tied effort to outcome. Power was earned stroke by stroke, creating a dialogue between shooter and machine. In the modern era, Crosman shifted toward cow cartridges and pre-charged pneumatics. Compressed gas cylinders replaced manual pumping as the source of power. This was marketed as progress, allowing rapid fire without effort, but it erased discipline from the experience. The shot became cheap and effortless, encouraging careless firing rather than deliberate marksmanship. The philosophy of power without powder evolved into power without effort, severing the connection between labor and result that had defined the brand's origins. The Crosman identity itself underwent a sterile corporate transformation. Once a family name rooted in Rochester, it became a brand label inside a portfolio of outdoor products. Mergers and rebranding diluted its heritage. The Fairport factory remained, and skilled workers continued their craft. But the brand became one product line among many, surrounded by imported plastic gear and marketing-driven SKUs. The legacy split in two. Enthusiasts and collectors preserved vintage models, restoring brass valves and steel components, maintaining the old philosophy in workshops and basements. Meanwhile, the retail shelves told a different story. Modern Crosman products hung in blister packs, almost entirely plastic, lightweight, brightly colored, designed to compete for attention in a digital age. The components felt loose, the sights crude, the triggers soft and flexible. These were shadows of their predecessors, stripped of mass, precision, and permanence. The Crosman story mirrors a broader shift in American culture. It began in a seed shop rooted in soil, pests, and survival, producing tools from steel and wood and powered by human effort. It ended in a digital world where backyard shooting is restricted, pests are managed by chemicals, and rifles are plastic replicas powered by disposable cartridges. The silence that followed was not just acoustic, but philosophical. The original seat of power grew into an industrial giant, then was dismantled and reshaped into a hollow imitation. The Crosman kid, who pumped, waited, practiced, and learned responsibility, was replaced by a consumer who fires, discards, and moves on. The empire of air became empty, and the suburbs lost the familiar sound of pneumatic shots, replaced by the constant hum of modern convenience and sealed, silent living spaces.